And good morning, everyone. Today is the 8th day of the month of Tammuz. It's my son Mendel's birthday. He's turning 15 today. And today is also the 6th day of July. And welcome to our class. We are continuing to study the book, The Four Worlds. And we have touched upon the spirituality and the spirit of the spiritual worlds. And one would think, one would conclude that time and space are only where time and space exists. Physical space really needs time, because if you have a world and it's as big as the world is, then there are 24 spots in the world. Each one of them would occupy an hour. So you've got a 24-hour radius around a world, and you can't be in New York and be in Hong Kong, where one of our children are currently. So you can't be in New York and in Hong Kong and have the same time. That would be absurd, because if it is now 10:30 in the morning, it's nighttime in Hong Kong. It's 10:30 at night, it's 12 hours ahead. Or if you happen to be in Melbourne, Australia, where one of our kids was earlier this year, then in Melbourne, Australia, it is currently 13 hours ahead of us. So it would be 11 o'clock at night, and so you can't call this 10 o'clock a.m. So you have to have time in order to designate space as space.
But 50% of your genes are there.
50%. How many genes? Huh? Oh, of my genes.
Your son or your daughter
in Hong Kong
has 50% of your genes.
She is made of 50% of
Right.
her is my genes, but not 50% of my genes. 50% of her is my genes, not 50% of my genes.
No, but I'm saying you're there. You're there. Not your genes, not your pants.
Even the other genes.
We understand that concept of
All right.
Yeah, it's just French way of
partial
thinking.
space.
Yeah.
It's just a different way of thinking about it.
I would say it is 10% of my children are in Hong Kong right now, and some of them are all over the rest of the place.
Except in the diamond business.
No, there's a lot of Jews in Hong Kong. My daughter is there for camp. That's what she's doing. She's running a camp there.
Wow. Does she speak Chinese?
It's summer there.
English, or what do they speak?
I think she speaks English. Yeah, it's English. You have to speak Chinese now as well, because it's a return to China, but it runs in English there.
Yeah.
Everything runs in English there.
Yeah.
Chinese are smart enough to keep
Great.
out of there. Anyway, so you have to have time if you're going to have space. And since God created the world has time, has space to it, so it has to have time. One would think that in the spiritual worlds, because there is no space, there's no physical space, no one occupies a space. It's just a presence, and all the presences could be together, and there's just no space. No one occupies any space. So since you don't occupy space, it shouldn't be an issue of time. But he went and proved in 10 different places, and if you have to watch the YouTube videos of the last 2 sessions just to get into that. But what he proved was that even in heaven there are chambers. In other words, there are places where some souls are here and some souls are there, and obviously there are differences between souls. There is a soul of Moses and the soul of others who are, despite the fact, not in a physical space, but there are differences. There are changes within the presence of the souls, in which case one has to say that there also can be a concept of time as well. Time and space always go together. And so, because if one rabbi wanted to visit another rabbi in a certain chamber in heaven, that means that chamber is there, and it takes time to get there, and there's another chamber somewhere else. So there's got to be differences, even in the spiritual world.
So there's time in the spiritual world.
Whatever that means. We haven't defined anything.
Okay.
All he was here to say is that does exist differences in space and in time, although one may think that would only apply to things on this world, because this is a physical world that occupies physical space. So there has to be time here. But does it have to be time there? And that's That's what he does say is that that's what happens.
What you could do is check to see if people are wearing watches.
They don't need to. They're so far above that they know what.
So they can keep time.
They know what time it is.
Telepathically communicating to each other.
Fred is
sure.
definitely better.
Oh, we need another.
You look like you're in a disturbed state. We have plenty of chairs standing right outside of right on the porch.
And then there's
The
those
place where
chairs right there.
everybody's back. That's right, that's what she's very afraid.
Oh, he's in there.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So time time and space have some form of place. So let's look at top of page 24. Having said all of that, however, top of page 24. However, the Zohar's phrase, the phrase that was made by the Zohar, similar to the upper world. He mentioned previously, which we learned quite a while ago, it's found on page 21, the Holy One, blessed be He, made the lower world similar to the upper world. That's the phrase of the Zohar. In other words, this lower physical world is analogous to the upper spiritual world. That's the statement that he made previously. So, from these words, similar to the upper world, when we say that our world is similar to the upper world, this means that this world is only in the image of the upper world, not identical to it. It's not a picture, it's not a carbon copy of the upper world. It's an image, a similarity, so we can have an idea, a concept of how the other world, the spiritual world, works. But not that this world is precisely the way it is in that world. In other words, you might not find mountains and sky and things. You know, when people say, is my dog coming with me? Are we going to play golf up there? All of these are human terms that you're trying to use for a spiritual world because you think that those are the things that offer you comfort or entertainment or whatever it is in the spiritual world. So you're taking with you what you find familiar. But that's not what the upper world is about. There are no golf courses up there. There are no dogs up there. Or anything else that you may think is in this world, including the best bagels or cream cheese or steak or women or the virgins that they're promised to these terrorists. It's not up there. That doesn't exist. That stuff is only physical, limited ideas that may be entertaining in this world. That's not real. That's all physical. That comes and goes. Golf courses are there, and sometimes they're not there. Golf courses are able to exist in certain places and are not able to exist in Antarctica and other places around the world. They just don't exist. Well, they don't exist in heaven. Sorry. They don't. To whoever was looking forward to it.
I've played enough, yeah.
There's a lot of jokes about that.
Of course, and you're pitching tomorrow and all, you know, a famous joke where the guy, two friends who are big baseball fans, and one ends up, they make up, and whoever dies first is going to come and tell what the story is. Anyway, he comes down after a few days after he dies and says, "Hey, buddy, it's amazing here. We're playing baseball every day." He says, "That's the good news." He said, "What's the bad news?" The bad news is you're pitching tomorrow. Yeah, I mean, those jokes are all over the place.
But they're not based in that.
They're nothing. It's not based on reality. You're trying to take physical entertainment, I guess, and try and fit it into the spiritual world. I've told this story before as well, where a guy, a great, it's also a euphemism, but a great, big Torah scholar, righteous man, worked very hard, became very wealthy, and he had a lot of money, and he wanted to take it with him. And so he fasts and prays and spends all this time, you know, engulfed in Judaism and spirituality, Torah, whatever, prayer. Finally, an angel appears to him And he says, I want to take it with me. Angel says, you're crazy. What's for? What? You can't take this stuff with you. It's physical. He says, no, I worked very, very hard, put a lot of energy. I didn't do anything wrong. It's not like, So Angel says, I'll get back to you. Comes back a few days later. He says, we've made a special exception. You may come. You may bring it with you. Oh, was he excited. Towards the end of his days, he took his money, transferred it all to blocks of gold, so to make it easier. Then he left. He called in the burial society, and they told him, listen, I have special permission. I've got a letter. I'm allowed. They said, that's the strangest thing we've ever seen. What are you talking about? We send people in a cotton suit, and that's about it. That's all you go. He says, no, I have the thing. Just put the letter in my hand and put the gold in the... Okay, guy dies, puts it in, and indeed, he's going up to heaven. He's carrying this bag. He gets to the gates. And Angel says, what do you have in that bag? He says, oh, wait a minute. I got special permission. Here's the letter. The angel opens it up and sees the gold. He says, what are you bringing here? He says, that's my possessions. I worked very hard for this. Looks at the letter. He says, the letter seems to be authentic. They let you take with you from the world, yeah. He says, yeah. He says, what do you bring that for, though? Well, there's nothing we can do with this here. I mean, if you had permission to bring with you things from this world, there are so many things you could have brought. Bring your tefillin, bring your top. What's this? What are you going to do with this here? You can't do anything with your tefillin either. But what are you going to do with this? It's a joke. This is gold. What is that? It's nothing. Gold can only get you something. You can't eat it.
Put it at the end of the rainbow.
Yeah, it's for someone else to pick up. The only thing you can do with money is spend it and buy things and get things that you might want or need or may have essentials to it. But possessions, which we think and we perhaps look up to people and adore and adulate these people, and we look at, it's nothing. If a person has a lot of money, that person could have worked hard for it, or the person could have received it from a lottery or from an inheritance or whatever it is. But it'll only last as long as a person is in this world. And that person may be blessed with that's a blessing, definitely a blessing. But if that person is not going to invest that money into spiritual things, like giving tzedakah, as we will be explaining on Tuesday evening in our class on July 8th, I think it is. It's the art of giving. And by the way, the next book after this is the Kabbalistic idea of giving tzedakah. It's all esoteric and spiritual, but it's amazing what happens as a result of the physical act of it. It's not metaphor. It's straight into heaven. It's the most important mitzvah in Judaism. It's tzedakah. When the Talmud talks about the mitzvah, it's the mitzvah of tzedakah. So why is it that important? What goes on in heaven when this happens? Anyway, that's from the third Rebbe of Lubavitch, which this book is a long way before. I just bought it now when I was in New York, so don't think I didn't think about you when I was there. I bought it on Tuesday on the Rebbe's 20th yard site in honor of our class. Anyway, I have other books here that we can look at, but I felt that one just. I opened it up and I said, oh, it's going to be about giving. And I looked at it and it's nothing about giving. It's about receiving. It's about what happens to the person and what happens to the soul and what happens in the upper worlds when tzedakah is given. An amazing volume. Anyway, back to here. So going up to heaven and taking with us, imagining that we are taking with us the delights and pleasures and entertainment and games of this world, is missing the whole point of the spirituality. Our spirituality could care less about what our physicality can really be inspired by. So when you walk into a house or walk into a kosher restaurant and the aroma is killing you and you got to have some of that steak, or take that example, whichever way you want to go. I walk into that room, you see that guy and you say, oh, I have to. This is the man of my dreams. All of that is totally carnal, physical, corporeal, nothing. It's just your body reacting to something. It has nothing to do with your soul. In a certain sense. If I want to take it deeper, I can. I plan to write about this idea in 6 weeks from now, when the Torah portion says, it's not on bread alone that man lives, which means basically, as the Hasidic explanation is, that it's the godliness within the bread that sustains and nourishes the person, not the bread. The bread comes and goes. It sticks in your body, but the body also comes and goes. What remains is what we've done with the bread, what we've done with the energy, with the godliness that's in there. So ultimately, what goes with us is what we've done to nourish our souls, not what we've done to nourish our bodies. It just takes longer for the body to decompose if we take a lot of bread with us to the grave. But that doesn't mean any. It just goes. It ends up in the grave. It's more worms to feed. That's all. That might be a good thing, but that's not. That doesn't help the person.
The bank in heaven is not gold based, it's tzedakah based.
It's mitzvah. It's spiritual based.
Spiritual.
Tzedakah is just one of the mitzvahs. It is a mitzvah. There are so many other mitzvahs. They're putting on tefillin, they're keeping kosher, they're keeping of Shabbos, they're keeping of the Yom Tov, having mezuzahs, on and on. It's spiritual based. The difference between this world and the other world is that all godliness manifests itself in this world through the physical act. So everything in this world that we do is physical because we are physical beings. Our soul is here and enclosed or entrapped even in your body. And that's only to give life to your body so we can react physically to the spiritual bank, if you will. So everything that we do physically in this world is in the bank, if it's a spiritual focus. So if we ate kosher food, and we made a blessing before and after, and then we took that energy and we used it for good and positive outcomes in this world, then we've got that food has gone into the good bank. If we though have not followed any of those things, just eaten what we want and when we want, and just gluttonously stuffed ourselves with things that may not be kosher or whatever, and then we take that energy and we don't do anything, even if we do eat kosher and everything, but we don't utilize it in a proper positive way, then we've taken that energy and we've blown it. That's why we have Yom Kippur. That's why we have on a daily basis, we pray to God to forgive us. These are things that we do inadvertently, even just humanly, without thinking. So ultimately, the goal is to as you put it, to put it into the spiritual bank. So that's how this world works. In the other world, it's only the spiritual world, and we can't really appreciate it. What do you mean there's no golf and no dogs and no food and no women? What do you mean by that? So what are you going to do all day? So what do you do all day? What do you do all day, all night? What do you do there?
What do you do over there?
Well, that's why we had a Tuesday night class a couple of weeks ago.
How about that?
Yeah, and we spoke about this. We don't have YouTubes of those classes. But what we do all day or all night, or what is that? It's a pursuit of spirituality, which is endless. It's understanding Torah. And the more preparation we have in this world to understand the Torah, the better off we're going to be in the other world. We won't be left behind because we can't be in a group that studies something and we're not ready for that. So there is a comprehension in the other world. There is wisdom and understanding and knowledge in the spiritual world. Those are not tangibles. Those are spiritual things in this world. Wisdom is not a physical thing. We can't hold wisdom or understanding. It's an intangible. That's more of a spiritual, physical thing.
I forgot what I was going to ask.
Okay.
Good. But Jan, and we get
No. You may have answered this, or you're going to answer it at some point. I'm sure it's too early, I'm sure it's very deep. But you're closer to God in that world?
What do you mean by
The
closer?
spiritual? I don't know what I mean.
Oh.
I'm not sure what that means.
Are you more godly in that world? You're only godly in that world. But spirituality and godliness are two different things.
Is God an entity?
Yes, of course.
So
It's an entity that is
physically.
God is everything. Even the spiritual world was created by God. Everything is Him. Everything.
But that's I know that's a higher
Right.
level than here. We're at the lowest level of the world.
But that doesn't mean you can't be close to God.
No,
Or
I know,
closer to
but
God.
Are you closer? Or
It depends what you mean by closer.
Oh,
That's too much for now.
okay. I thought you might have to. That might be.
There's a lot of
Here.
details in that, which is very difficult to get into now, because ultimately God created this physical world. Why did He create it? So created it so that souls, even though they are in heaven and they're supposedly so close to God or spiritual, whatever it is, He wants them down here. That means that because only here can you take a physical matter and transform it into something holy, spiritual. What He ultimately wants is that this physical world should be a spiritual place. That's why we're here. That's why 7 billion people are here. That's why all the animals and bugs and birds and fish and plants and flowers and trees and stones and rocks and water and earth are here. So that this place should become God's garden. Calls it a garden in the book of the Song of Songs. Metaphorically meaning that this is a beautiful place. It should be. It could be. Potentially it could be. So whether you get closer to God is a very good question. On the other hand, the soul is constantly yearning to go back home. When you're in exile, you always want to go home. Doesn't matter how distant you are. Ultimately, you want to get home. You want to be in a place where you are in the comforts of the home. My kids complained bitterly when we moved here. We have older kids, we don't have younger kids. They missed the other house. The other house hadn't been seen to in many years and needed a paint job. We only had a limited amount of space in that house. We didn't have enough bedrooms. Everybody was sleeping on top of each other. We didn't have enough, even on the list level, we didn't have that kind of room. We just had a small little room. Many of you were in our house. It was a nice house, but it wasn't. It was good for us when we moved there with 5 or 6 kids. Mm-hmm. But with 10 kids, Kananahara, and with the in-laws and with grandchildren, it was a madhouse on top of a madhouse. And there were many faults that don't appear in this house. And they're complaining. The first month or 2 that we were here, bitterly complaining. So I would say to them, what are you missing here in this house that you don't have, that you had in the other house? And they said, no, it's not about this place, it's not about the space. I said, we don't have the friends. It was the comfort zone. So now, the younger kids who have been living here now for over a year and a half, we don't hear any complaints from anyone anymore. But when we ask them, well, do you still miss the other house? Yeah, we do. What do you miss? Well, I miss the corner on the wall over there. It's nostalgia. And I said, we brought you new friends here. We have Mel and Iris and Judy and Fred and Maritza and everybody is here. So we have other friends. Yeah, but it's like, not school friends with that. So you bring your school friends here for a Shabbos. It's a weekday you don't have friends anyway. If you think about it, I don't have any nostalgia to that house. I don't have any nostalgia to the house that I was brought up in and my parents sold a year and a half ago. Some of my siblings were screaming to high heavens. And when we were in England to celebrate my mother's birthday, they kept on going back to that old house, which is already, like, what are you doing? And I walked into the house and I didn't go, oh, here I slept, and move on in life. But for some people, the comforts, the confines, when you drive along the streets in Brooklyn and it reminds you of your grandfather or your uncle or the synagogue that you went to or whatever it is, so you go back in time a little bit and you just feel that comfort, that childhood.
You don't get any of those.
I don't get that, nah.
Wow.
Not really. I mean, there's something.
Depends on where you come from. I wouldn't go back in a billion years.
No, there you go. So
Well, I don't mean to live.
Right. Just to visit.
I don't mean to live.
I don't
No,
have.
I mean to visit. I wouldn't go back in another million
Well,
years.
my home isn't.
Good for you. You're lucky.
No, it's a disaster. You get shot there, but
So why did you go? Why did you want to go?
no, it's
back?
just the
Could have gotten
town.
shot there when I was there.
It's
The town like Philadelphia, just there's something that feels more homely about it.
Homely. That's the word.
Yeah.
Homely. Now, I grew up in England, and I do not feel that at all. In fact, I only go when I have to. I don't feel like some of my sisters are, go to England, and we're going to go. What are you going to do in England? What did you leave behind over there? We're going to go shopping, and I don't understand this stuff. Shopping in England is different than shopping in America. I don't know. There's certain foods that you could eat over there. How much could you? All right. It's just. In my mind, and I know I shouldn't say this, but grow up. I'm saying to myself or to myself, move on. In life, we move. The sign of life is movement. That means we do go to other places. We can move out of our parents' house. And we're very excited to do that, and we move on in life. I am very, very, very happy because this is a bigger house. This is a more progressive, more space for us. I'm here with my wife and my family. Why do I need? And my friends. What do I need more than? That's what I'm saying. The emotions and feelings that people have, this comfort zone is somewhat strange to me. However, and I will say this, it does give people a certain sense of homeliness. Oh, this was home. This feels like home. This reminds me of home, especially if you had a good home.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing with exile. An exiled person, if you had to live in Brazil for 20 years and then you came back to Philadelphia, boy, would that be different. Because then you would feel much more, because the language is different and the culture is different and the food is different and the whole mindset is different. So when you're coming back to that, then you're not just coming back to a location. You're coming back. That's ultimately where the soul wants to go back home. Where is home? Home is where it can be best spiritually felt. So the only thing we can do here is do more mitzvahs, focus more on the spiritual side of ourselves, and then we could do something to comfort or to nourish the soul. Ultimately, though, you'll never make the soul feel good, because however good it is in this world, it's going to be more spiritual on the other world. At the same time, hold the thought, at the same time, the Talmud says, against your will you live. The soul does not come down to this world without being basically enticed at the best. You must go down. And against your will you die. The soul does not want to necessarily leave, especially an older person. So people who have lived many decades in this world, the soul has sort of become entrenched, used to it. So although it wants to go, it's not sure if it should. Once it gets there, it gets home, and it's home. So, and I was talking about this yesterday regarding the exile that we're in before the Mashiach comes. It's the same idea. We can't imagine going to Israel and finding comfort over there. What? The people who speak Hebrew, I don't speak the language. I don't speak the culture, and I hate those people who keep on pushing each other out. They're living on an edge over there. They eat supper for lunch. Yeah, they live in apartments. I don't want this. When I have a house, I'm good where I am. That's called living in exile, where you don't even realize that we're not in the right place where we should be. Ultimately, home is where we feel best. Go ahead.
Do you think that spiritually has something to, when you say we have this feeling to go back? So if spiritually, it's in our mind when we come down or when we're sit down or whatever, the spirit always has us feeling like physically, I want to go home. But spiritually, when I go home, I'm going back to my comfort. You think that has any kind of relation?
Are you asking that if the soul leaves, then there's nothing left behind over here, it just goes away?
No, I know it goes back. I feel like it goes back. And then whatever assignment we get when we go back is to come down to help the person that has come down spiritually in the form of whoever. Maybe I came back as Jane instead of Beatrice, and so now, or John, whatever. But spiritually, I had to come down because it was something I didn't complete or something that is missing. So I came down to help this person.
Which person? Who's the person?
The physical person.
Physical person is the same as a spiritual person. A spiritual person assumes the identity of this physical person.
Correct, but spiritually, it's already in us to go home. So when we come down, we want to go back. And maybe I'm not making myself clear.
Spiritually, we want to go back to where it's best spiritual.
Right.
So if you were living in Brazil or if you're living in Hong Kong, and where culture is very different and the food is very different, and you haven't quite gotten, every time you count, you want to think, do I do itchy putchy kitchy muchy, or do I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? And your American hot dog you're missing a lot, and the American style and everything else. And so you go on the internet and you find yourself again, and everything else, so you can remain connected to your roots. Ultimately, though, you want to, a person who has not moved on, a person who has not been able to find themselves completely, but remain there anyway because of family or because of business or whatever it might be, ultimately that person wants to go back to feel comfort. So you have a lot of Israelis who live here, and you would imagine a life over here is so much easier and better and nicer. But they always talk about they want to go back, or they'll spend 2 or 3 or 4 months in Israel without beating, and they'll think it's a day. They'll imagine themselves. Asaf calls me every week. Asaf, Braz's son, Patashnik. So he calls me every week.
Is he in Israel?
Yeah, he's been in Israel since end of May, early June. And his parents are there, and his sister is there, and his grandparents, and then cousins and everything. I said, "What are you doing?" He says, every time I ask him that, he just, "Yeah, I'm going here, I'm going there, and I'm hanging out, and I'm running, and I'm it's basically I'm doing nothing." And that's vacation. So that's summer vacation. And he makes it sound like as if that's the most natural thing, the natural place to be. He's temporarily here, but he's in school here. He's got friends here. Huh?
Nostalgic.
No,
It's because
he's only been out of Israel how many years? 3 years?
No, more.
More.
Yeah,
That's a nostalgic.
It's not just nostalgia. He feels most identifiable with that place.
Yeah.
So in other words, it can bring out the most
Yes.
within him. It's the same thing with the soul. The soul, the soul can feel best brought out. The stuff can be most brought out in the spiritual environment. Over here, you can never be sure. There's always other things to contend with. It's not necessarily often where a person sits down to eat and focuses on the food and the energy of the food rather than the business right now. And it's not often that a person completes the entire service and prays and makes blessings and does mitzvahs and has mitzvahs and keeps Shabbos and going. It's just not the way it is. So the soul is lost here. It's unable to bring itself out properly. It's unable to express itself fully because it's confined. That's exile. Exile means that we can't be expressed completely. It doesn't mean necessarily that you're shackled. It doesn't mean that you're behind bars. It means that you can be living in North Korea and you're in total exile. Nobody's tying you down, but they're tying your mind down, you're tying your mouth down, so you can't behave like a human being, so you're not free. Therefore, you're in exile. You can be in communist Russia and you want to shake a lulav and you can't. Or put on tefillin and go to a shul. Just simple things, build a sukkah. Can't.
Can you do that now?
Yeah, they're not. There's no communism there now.
No, I mean,
You can't do that in North Korea.
In Russia? No, right now.
Oh, in Russia, the government itself is helping you there. It's unbelievable what's going on there. No, today it's finished. That stuff is over. The persecution is over. But for a human being to live in North Korea, I don't think there's any Jews in North Korea. I don't think there's a single Jew there. But the people who live there are in total exile. Complete submissive exile. Nobody's standing on their heads. And the people can go to work and come back from work. They can go on vacation. They can go visit the swimming pool. They can go visit friends and family. But they are in complete and utter bitter exile. They don't even know how dark it is. That's the worst exile you can have, where you don't even know how terrible it is. Okay. In other words, page 24, in other words, the difference between the upper and lower worlds is nothing more than the fact that the lower world is physical and corporeal, while the upper world is spiritual, pure, and clear, as will be explained. So, the fact The upper world is spiritual, this world is physical. Therefore, you can only say that this world is similar. And that's where I started with all of this, because we use physical terms for the spiritual world because we don't know any better. We can't identify with the spiritual world because we can't feel spirituality. God created us and designed us not to feel the spiritual. Only very, very rare few great ones can do that. The third Rebbe of Lubavitch, before he passed away, he asked his son, what does he see up over there? He says, oh, I see a beam in the roof. He says, and what do you see, Dad? And he says, I see the Spirit of God that's giving that beam its energy. I see the soul of the beam. It's not just a piece of wood. The fact that it exists is because God wants it to exist, and there's some godliness in there. At the time he was about to die, he was so spiritualized that he was able to see the physical world like that. Very few people ever who have been able to do that, because we are ultimately in this world.
Is it?
And therefore, God doesn't need us to see that stuff.
You probably will beg off this question because you know that. But a Christian, I know they don't have they're not the chosen people and have the Torah, but some of them would proclaim that they want to be spiritual and they do things to be spiritual. Is that just a figment of their imagination, or you think that's possible?
I once wrote about this in the Good Shabbos email. I'll answer you with another story. A woman came to me once when I was teaching in the school, and she says, Rabbi, I wasn't allowed to have a bat mitzvah when I was growing up. The Orthodox don't let the women perform. But now I'm going to be reading from the Torah and I'm going to be having a bat mitzvah. I said, okay, far be it from me to cool anyone down. And she wasn't asking my opinion or anything. She was just trying to impress me. So I just said, oh, nice, okay, good. It's totally against Judaism for that. It's man-made when people say, I want to do this or that. I do what I feel like doing is not what Judaism is. It's totally the opposite of Judaism. But
well, I know it's not Judaism.
That doesn't come into... Anyway, listen. A few weeks later, she comes back. I'm sitting and eating lunch, and she tells me that was so spiritual. I read. I said, what did you do? Oh, I read from the Torah. I was called up to the Torah. It was the most spiritual feeling I ever had. That's what she says. So I said to her, how did you get to the synagogue? It was the AA synagogue. And I know she lived not too far from me, so that would be a walk of about 15 miles. I said, how did you get to synagogue? She said, what do you mean? I don't keep Shabbos. I drove. And so all I said was, oh, that's all I said. I did not jump down her throat. That's not my place, isn't to be God's policeman. She didn't ask for my opinion, and I wasn't going to knock my opinion down her throat. That's not the way Chabad works. We don't condemn and judge people. But in my mind, I said, what a tragedy when a Jewish person identifies some kind of a feeling as a spiritual feeling, at the same time, before and after, did something complete opposite of the spiritual feeling. In other words, if you want spirituality, ask spirituality what is spirituality. You can't say, I felt spiritual. I don't say you don't have a feeling. I'm not even going to say you didn't have an uplifting feeling, but call it spirituality. Spirituality means godliness. It's a godly feeling. It's a holy feeling. Holiness has entered into me. You can't go to a synagogue by car on Shabbos and say, I did something right or something spiritual. I don't judge people for doing that, but don't come back to me. You can't go up and be called to the Torah when the Jewish law says that can't happen. And you can't read from the Torah for the same reason and tell me that it's a spiritual feeling. Who told you what a spiritual feeling is? But if you went to the mikveh because the Torah says you should go, and when you kept the Shabbos because the Torah says you should go, and you prayed your prayers the way the Torah says you should pray, and then you tell me you have a spiritual feeling, I can identify with that. I cannot identify with a person who did everything that it says not to do, went ahead and did it anyway, and then claims that that's a spiritual feeling. And it's the same thing with the Christian people. The Torah does give the Christians certain rules, regulations, laws to follow. There are 7 Noahide laws from which come a bunch of other laws. There's a total of about 30 to 40 laws that would pertain to the non-Jewish person. When the non-Jewish person engages in those laws and then they say they had spiritual feelings, I believe that. But when they're doing things that to me and to you or to others maybe is pure fantasy, then that's not necessarily a spiritual feeling. In other words, the definition of spiritual is things that are above this world, not what man told you or dictated you to do. It's what God tells you to do. Then you can say, I have a spiritual feeling because God transcends this world. But if a man tells you to do it, you know what? A man can tell you, I love asparagus. And it will make you feel great. And I said, it's asparagus. I hate the taste. I can't eat it. Or something that I can identify with beets. I think beets are delicious. And borscht is fantastic. And it makes me feel great. Well, I can tell you what, it makes me feel ill. So you can say, I eat bread and it makes me feel great. I can eat peanut butter and it makes me feel great. And this guy says, I got to go to the hospital. I'm almost half dead when I eat peanut butter. So it's a man's feeling. So the man can feel this way and a man can feel that way. You can tell me that Jesus is the best thing in the world that ever happened. So 1 billion people may say that, and 500 million people may even imagine that. But that doesn't make it spiritual. What makes things spiritual is what God says to do. For the Yidden and for the non-Yidden, for everyone there's something. There's a place here. Everyone is placed in this world to do something, and everyone has a spiritual. Even the beam in the ceiling has a spiritual soul. Everyone, every human being, of course, has a spiritual soul, spiritual side. But if you're doing what God wants you to do, then you can talk to me about spiritual feelings.
There are 30 or 40 sort of laws in the Torah about
There are 7
sort of
laws.
non-Jewish.
There are 7 laws. Those are the clear, defined laws. Even those are not quite as clear. You got to extrapolate them. But the Talmud, the Rambam brings this as a law that Moses was told by God at Sinai that there is a message for the rest of the world, and we ought to be the light unto the nations. The light unto the nations is from the book of Isaiah. It says those words clearly. We ought to be a light unto the nations. A light unto the nations means that we ought to tell them, to teach them, to guide them, direct them, to be a light to the rest of the world, that they also have a mission to accomplish. It's not only Jews, but it has to come through the Jewish people to them, and it's in the Torah. Those are the 7 Noahide laws, that call, which is belief in God, belief in God, 5 positive and 2 negative. The 5 positive are belief in God, a justice system. There has to be a system of justice. I'm sorry, 5 negative and 2 positive. I said 5 positive. 5 negative and 2 positive. The negative ones are the positive. Okay, the 2 positive, belief in God and justice system. The 5 negatives are don't murder, don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't worship idols, and don't be the cruelty to animal law, which is not just simply don't be cruel to animals, a little different than that. But from these laws stem a bunch of things, like murder. What does murder quite mean? And stealing, what does stealing quite mean? Within that justice system, there is also honor your father and your mother, also one of the laws that belong there. So at the end of the day, there's 30, I think it's 37 or 38 or something like that, laws that end up coming out of there. Giving charity is another one. So a lot of it comes out of there, of this. But these are the 7 main principal laws from which other laws come as well. So that everyone has a mission. Of course there's a mission. And anyone who says that I feel spiritual feelings when I murder 3 kids, and because my God told me to do that, can you go that far? That's what I'm saying. Ultimately, you can do things that hurt people or which hurt God and say, God, that's my religion. I believe that. That gives me a spiritual feeling. Allah Akbar. So I'm going to murder as many people as I can. That's my ultimate goal in life. See, spiritual feelings are not physical, are not people's way of looking at things. As soon as we look at the Torah as a man-made document, that people decided that, then there is no spirituality. What's spiritual feelings? Tikkun olam, is that spiritual? What is spiritual? If once the Torah becomes irrelevant because man wrote it, it is irrelevant. That Torah is irrelevant if it's a man-made document, because Man decides one thing today, and due to circumstances and time and place, decide another thing tomorrow. So today I could decide to build my house up all the way, and tomorrow I could decide to build my house wide and far and expansive. It's up to my choice. I do what I want. Then there's no spirituality involved with that. As soon as man interferes. So when a Jewish woman tells me, I drove to synagogue, I haven't been to the mikveh, I didn't keep kosher that day, I didn't keep Shabbos that day, I went up to the Torah, a problem, I read from the Torah, another problem, because the law says not to do, or not debate why and what, we can talk about this a different time. Bottom line is, this is what it says you shouldn't do. And you go ahead and do it, and it tells me I had a spiritual feeling. How is that possible? What's spiritual? That's the point. So, everyone has the opportunity to become more spiritual, Jews and Gentiles alike. Jews have more opportunities because wherever we turn, there's another thing we need to do. That's Shabbos today, and there's tefillin tomorrow, and there's kosher here, and there's mezuzah. It's nonstop. It's on your head all the time. You got 613 commandments, and only 207 of them can be kept today outside of the exile. And even then, that's a pretty big plate that we have. So, we have a lot to do, so we have a lot more opportunities to constantly be connected and constantly feel spiritual connections when we do these things. Or we can just go through them and not feel necessarily spiritual, but we do them anyway because of connection. But the spirituality is based on what God decides, what spirituality decides is spiritual. That's the point. Have a nice week, everyone. See you next